words of eulogy from Joyce Ben David, Carol Goldberg, Sarit Ann Standing, and Eitan Ben David, as read by Daniel Ben David.
So memory is a funny thing. While we may think that it should be a complete picture, most often it has gaps and holes and missing pieces. I became especially aware of that when posed with a question by a chaplain. The chaplain who visited me from the Valley Hospice, upon meeting me for the first time, asked, what kind of mom was your mom? Was she strict? Pause. I really didn't know what to say. Where do we begin with a question like that? I hesitated to answer because I hadn't thought of my mom with that perspective. It just was. She was my mom, Minnie Rubenstein, Manchaziesel. And was I answering the question as an adult sitting beside her, caring for her, knowing that she was slowly fading? Or was I suddenly thinking of myself as a young child at home with a mommy who was caring for me? And what age was I? All of a sudden I felt like I was about 10 years old. Well, how well do we really know our parents? How well do we know them as people of their own, with their own memories and dreams and aspirations? As I thought more about my mom, I realized that I had plenty of holes and missing pieces. At home, it was just my sister Carol and I, two girls who didn't make much trouble. More or less, we followed the rules, did what was expected of us. On those days when we had off from school, we did laundry and other chores, because my mother worked at that time 4 days a week. And on school days, we were often home before my mom, so we put the potatoes in the oven for dinner and, we got everything going. My mom was a bookkeeper in those days, working for a company that sewed ladies' handbags in New York, the days way before China was even a thought. Yet Mom always made sure that there was dinner on the table that lent a certain rhythm to the household. Part of that rhythm was also the daily phone calls to her mother, my grandmother. Kol hakavod to my mother, who went to work in order to be sure that my sister and I had a Jewish education. We lived in Brighton Beach at the time when my sister and I, at a young age, traveled on the Coney Island Avenue bus to the Bialik School. It was a good fit for us, a conservative day school, not aligned with the conservative movement. And my parents made fabulous friends, sticking close with the Bialik group, their social circle for all those years. My memory, if incomplete, was that tuition was only about $350, but I suppose at that time it was substantial enough. The Bialik School was just one example of long-term friendships that my parents, but especially my mother, savored. My mother stayed friendly with both of her bridesmaids from her wedding, writing letters to each other, even though they all lived in the New York area. Those childhood friends stayed in touch for nearly 80 years. My mother was 91. I don't remember what my mother ate for breakfast when we were young children, which was one of the chaplain's questions, but I do have many images of her sitting at the kitchen table, smearing butter on matzah and nibbling away. In between bites, she was doodling with a pen while watching TV and talking on the phone. That was pure pleasure for her. Actually, I'm just going to add, near the end, of course, her favorite pleasure was anything that was chocolate. She always preferred sweets, and if you give her chocolate ice cream or chocolate, even in chocolate Ensure, over vanilla, she would choose that any day. My mother really did try to befriend new people that she met. It seemed like kindergarten all over when my mother moved into her new apartment, the 5-star independent living facility in Teaneck. That was 5 years ago. She asked, how do I meet people? Well, I make new friends. And with Mazel, into the apartment across the hall moved in Helen Frankel, Barbara Froehlich's mother. And it was as if they had been forever friends. The two of them became fast friends, giggling together as they ate their meals and chit-chatting all day long. They were simply cut from the same cloth. And even this past Shabbat, Helen knew that my mom had passed even before I did. I was in Detroit, not in Ann Arbor, visiting Sarit, Jared, and Batya. We didn't answer the phone, but Helen knew, and she sat with patience, my mother's wonderful aide, outside of the day, in the hallway outside of the room for much of the day. My mom liked to please people, wanting to make a great impression in her new home, and so appreciated the staff that helped her, always saying hello and good morning to everyone. But on many days, Beverly, one of the cleaning staff, came, and I was there when my mom could barely stand up from her chair, but she quickly said to Beverly, "Oh, I can move out of the way for you, Beverly, so that you can do your job, no problem." She just never wanted to be in the way. She did make things pretty easy for my sister and I, agreeing to move to Teaneck when we asked her to. She even did her own cleaning of her apartment so that we would have less to do. And men. My mom, despite her loyalty to her girlfriends, preferred to sit and socialize with men. My father passed away 20 years ago at age 78, with his yahrzeit just last week, Daled Shvat. My dad was a lovely person, and my parents had a solid marriage just shy of 50 years. Their relationship was based on commitment, reliability, and respect for one another. But within a year, my mom met Ed. What a catch. How Ed wanted to marry my mom, who continually refused. She wanted her own independence. Ed stood up straight, ironing his own shirts for as long as we knew him, when he passed away at 100 just last year. And as Johnny said, Ed, who called my mother 4 to 5 times a day, passed when he could no longer have a phone conversation with my mother. She just couldn't talk on the phone anymore. My mom was particular about certain things. With a nail file always nearby, her nails were always well manicured, and she fussed when periodically she broke one. She was always neatly dressed and kept her clothes well ironed. Ironing was considered an important enough skill that at 5 years old, I was apprenticed to iron my father's handkerchiefs. One of the last full spontaneous sentences that my mother said when Carol was visiting a few months ago. Carol walked in wearing a denim skirt and a striped shirt. She looked fine. But in my mother's blunt style, she blurted out, "You don't match." In my mother's point of view, my sister just wasn't matchy-match as she preferred. As a bookkeeper, bank statements needed to balance. One day she helped Johnny in his office and was totally distressed when she couldn't balance his account to the last penny. That relationship was short-lived. Only in the office, though. They got along fine. And patience. A woman who left her husband and 3 daughters behind in Ghana so that she could work in America, hoping for a better life for them all. You brought grace and love and care that you gave my mom as you had the daily grind of cleaning and feeding. I was always touched that you thanked me for coming to visit. Mom, you had miles that lived from only Carol and I. There were 27 great-grandchildren, 23 of them living in Israel. My daughter-in-law, Etta, a trained chaplain, taught me that it's valuable before the person passes to take the time to say goodbye, to say thank you, to thank them for what they've done, and to forgive them. I am grateful that I listened and did so. I planted a big cast on my mom's forehead on the last day that I saw her and told her that she was a good mom, a role model for me to be reliable, loyal, hardworking, and to finish a job that you start. When I said goodbye to my mom on the last day, she didn't respond. I was glad to hold her hand and stroke her face. Her presence was comforting, making me feel that I still had a parent alive in my life. Now it will be memories and stories about the good life that my mom had, and that she gave us modeling consistency, attention to detail, and commitment. Mom, I love you, and know that you tried your hardest to give us a great life.
How do you sum up a life that spans 91 years in a few moments so that your friends, family, including grandchildren and great-grandchildren, will understand the essence of the woman? My mother, Minnie Rubenstein, Mancha Zisel bat Peretz and Haicha, was a woman of high standards. Even when she couldn't afford the suit from Macy's that her friend Ellen could buy, she sewed one to perfection. I always remember my mom on the electric sewing machine, her stitches always perfect. Growing up, I thought her Hebrew name was Menucha, and only when in college did I learn the truth. She disliked the Yiddish name, so she took one of her own without asking, again facing the world on her own terms. She had a hard childhood. Money didn't come easily in the household, and although an A student and definitely college material, her father could not send her to college. Instead, she had to work. As a result, she was not happy about the limited choices of her life and turned away from some of the religious structure that she felt was limiting to her. But despite some of the religious dogma imposed on her, she allowed her 2 daughters to go to a private Hebrew school called Bialik, located on Church Avenue in Brooklyn. It was difficult for her and my father monetarily to send us, but the commitment was made, and was once again made for Joyce and myself when I asked to go to Yeshiva of Flatbush. She respected high standards, and that was her guiding principle. She taught us to be independent, and I believe that allowed me to make decisions on my own. As a result, I believe that my mother had the schlut to raise 2 religious daughters, which gave way to 7 religious grandchildren and their spouses, which gave way to 27 religious great-grandchildren, and an even bigger schlut to see 3 rabbis among her grandchildren and many who now live in Eretz Yisrael. Joyce and I did not compare speeches, so some of the same themes. One of her other traits was her loyalty to her friends. 3 women childhood friends, Ellen, Sylvia, and Minnie, attended each other's weddings, then bar mitzvahs, and even children's weddings. Even until last night, when the last remaining friend, Sylvia Rothman, Merrill Ween's mother, called me to enchant me with stories of my mother. We grew up hearing about these friendships and knew the ladies well. And I just saw Ellen's daughter came to be a Menachem Avil. While attending Bialik school, a group of about 10 couples formed a social group, which was appropriately named the Bialik group. Joyce and I had tables of these friends at our own kids' bar and bat mitzvahs, and even a few attending my kids' weddings. These were lifelong friends. What came later in life was serenity, to enjoy what she had, to praise her family when she saw something she liked. In my household, my grandchildren knew that whenever we were together, I began yelling, "Grandma, we have to get Grandma on the phone." My grandchildren knew that we would Skype with my mother, and although she often confused names and faces, there was always a huge smile on her face to see them. As a matter of fact, Joyce and I put posters on behind her wall, which Joyce talked about, and had pictures of all the grandchildren. So patients would say, "Oh, no, it's that one up in the corner. No, that's the one on the side." Sometimes she was just awestruck to look around and see what she had produced. "Mom, you had a full life, and although not everything was exactly as you wanted it, I don't think you would trade it with anyone else. You loved your family dearly. I asked for a mechila for anything I did to upset you or in any way that I did not give you the proper respect due to you. I love you and I miss you."
Growing up, Grandma Minnie and Grandpa Moish had a strong presence in my life. I remember that they would often come to Teaneck on Sundays and take us kids out for lunch. My siblings liked Jerusalem pizza, but I didn't. I remember that my grandma would take only me to Fleagle's so that I could get the food that I liked. I could easily picture their car, an old white Volvo that my grandfather took great care of. I could hear my grandmother call me Shana Meidela or Shana Punim as we walked into the car. In the cup holder between the seats, there was always a pack of Trident gum. I remember my first visiting day at summer camp. We all sat on the hill looking at the cars pull up, waiting eagerly for our visitors. My grandparents were there to greet me, and were there even before my parents. I remember the many letters that my grandparents mailed to me at summer camp. My grandmother's handwriting stood out to me. It was probably the only person I knew who wrote in cursive. My grandparents were present in a reliable and consistent way. But I also felt a particular connection to my grandmother, especially as I got older. I was her youngest grandchild. She always told me that when I was born, she looked at me, and in her words, quote, "There was something special." Grandma in a family where I was the youngest, was shy, and often felt out of the group. Thank you for noticing me and making me feel that I was special. I have vivid memories of sitting next to Grandma during Yamim Noraim in the B'nai Ashurim social hall. She would sit on the end right next to the aisle so that she could have easy access to walk out, and I would sit next to her. While she needed to eat on Yom Kippur because she had diabetes, she would quietly walk outside and do what she needed to do. She was independent and self-sufficient. She would often read the tefillot at her own pace, sometimes pointing out interesting things to me or asking me questions. She was often cold, so on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, when all the women are freezing and bundled up in blankets, my grandma's hands were ice. It sounds funny, but I used to take her hands and put them in my armpit so that they would get warm. She would laugh at my method, but I think it worked. Grandma was often present at many of our holidays, and we would laugh with her about the way she said chali and chumetz. Most of my memories of Grandma were in the last few years since she moved to Teaneck. Just as she moved into 5-Star, I also moved back to Teaneck. These few years together in Teaneck were very special. It was a privilege to be able to see each other on such a consistent basis and be a part of each other's lives. The casual conversations are what I remember most. She would tell me about the wonderful programs at her residence or about the people there. She would introduce me to her friends and beam as all eyes looked towards her for having young visitors. I would ask her questions about her past. Sometimes she would share, such as when she mentioned how she was very good at basketball when she was younger. Or she would shrug and respond, "Who knows?" A few years ago, I was on the Lower East Side and I located Seward Park High School where my grandmother went. She was excited when I told her what I saw, and I even showed her a picture. Even as she started to lose her memory, I would ask her what Yiddish words meant, and she would tell me. There's some things that were deeply ingrained in her. I used to call her every Friday, and she would want to hear what I made for Shabbos. If she missed my call, she would call me back and leave me a message. Sarit, Grandma, and then she would end with, so long. When Jared and I got married, we decided to use my grandparents' furniture that was their original bedroom set when they got married. When I told my grandmother that we were using it, she was so excited. Ed and Grandma came over for dinner to our apartment one night, and she was thrilled to see her furniture still in use. I would often show her pictures of her family from my phone. She would just sit there and beam. She could not get over how blessed she was to have such a large family. When she thought about her family, her face displayed a look of utter surprise and excitement, and she would always say, "Kenai Nahara, can you believe?" After a grandchild from Israel came to visit with their children, she would talk for days about their visit. She was so proud of her family. I am so grateful that Grandma was able to meet our daughter Badia this past summer. She could not stop smiling as she met her newest great-granddaughter. I am grateful that I had the opportunity to say goodbye when I saw her during my last trip to New Jersey in September. When I reflect on my grandmother as a person, there are certain themes that are clear. To Grandma, there were certain ways to do things. Neatness, manners, that is just what you did. She taught me to always put hand cream on my hands and elbows because that was simply the right thing to do. In our home, we often nibble at the Shabbat food in the kitchen before it is served on the dining room table. When my grandma used to catch us doing this, she would tell us to stop. But later on that night, we would often find her doing the same thing, thinking no one was looking. I would be remiss to speak